All right, welcome everyone. It's at 11:01 Eastern Daylight Time. This is Chris Lytle, and I appreciate your being on the call. At the introduction, this is some of the great sales books, Spin Selling, Neil Rackham's classic. If you look at the subtitle of that, the best validated sales method available today, develop and research studies of 35,000 sales calls that were recorded and then reviewed, and it's used by top sales forces across the world. I think that's the best sales book ever written. I think this is the best title of any sales book ever written. That's me behind the book. If you don't have a plan, stay in the car. That's Mac Hannon's book. Nice thing about that book is you don't have to read the book. You can simply read the title and act on the title. If you don't have a plan, stay in the car. Let me see if I can adjust one thing here. All right. And then this is my book, More Than 50,000 Copies Sold, The Accidental Salesperson. And we're going to talk more about books and kind of give you a history of sales training along with this content today. But this is Neil Rackham, the author of Spin Selling. He's a character. He's from South Africa. He lived in Borneo. He's lived in England. He's teaching at Sheffield University right now. Here he is in 2019. There's the YouTube video, November 12th, 2019. And the title of that is Spin Selling Still Relevant? And it's an interview with Neil. And I've transcribed it in the first big block of copy here. And he says the spin model is about understanding. I think that's a very important thing. Understanding is a word that goes in the first blank of your handout. And I suppose the breakthrough with spin was it's no longer about persuading customers, people persuade themselves. And I think that's an interesting finding. We're not trying to persuade, we're trying to understand. It's about really understanding them and our needs so you can do a good job of creating value. That hasn't changed, but some of the things have changed, which makes the spin model probably more relevant today than it was 30 years ago. One of the things that products have become commodities so that salespeople are the differentiator. And if salespeople are the differentiator, then how do they differentiate themselves? They differentiate by really understanding the customer much more deeply than the competition by being able to create new creative solutions. So way back when we did the original spin research, we found the situation questions about facts. How many locations do you have? How long have you been in business? Situation questions were slightly negatively correlated with success. You could ask too many of them. Today, they're actively positively negatively correlated. That is, you can ask a lot of situation questions and the customer will become really impatient. They'll say, you should have done your homework. You should have known that. I'm just going to see if anybody's in the waiting room. Looks like we're all here. You should have done your homework. You should have known that. So that's Neil Rackham's take. And I want to go back, that goes back 30 years. This goes back to 1970. Mac Hannon's book, Consultative Selling. He wrote, if you don't have a plan, stay in the car. But this is his classic. Over 100,000 copies sold. This is the 8th edition. And this is Amicom, my publisher of The Accidental Salesperson. There will never be an 8th edition of The Accidental Salesperson, I promise you that. He did 8 editions before he died, and this came out in 1994, the 8th edition. This goes way back to consultative selling, the Hannon formula for high margin sales at high levels. He says, you must bring something to the party. You cannot come empty-handed. Your understanding of the client's business must show evidence of diligence and intelligence. And I love that thought, that you got to bring something to the table. So we talked today about consultative selling, but Mac Hannon says you should not ask for any information that the client knows is publicly available. So think about that. Think about how you approach a customer. Are you asking for information that is publicly available? If you do that, you're boring the client, and they're going to say you should have done your homework. This is my old client, Crazy TV Lenny, in his store, American TV and Furniture. I was a young radio sales rep in the 70s. I'd been to the RAB school for salesmen. They didn't call it salespeople or salespersons. We were salesmen, even though we had women salespeople. But I had the consultant self-form from the RAB, and I went into American TV and I asked this guy in the picture, "What days are you open late?" And he looked at me and he said, "Chris, it's on the door." And so I didn't complete the questionnaire because the next question was, "What brands do you carry?" And I thought, well, they're on the floor. I could probably wander around and figure out what brands he carries. And I just quit asking questions that were the answer to which were publicly available. Not because I'd read Mac Hannon's book yet, but because this guy, I bored him already by asking him what days he's open late. So you don't ask questions, the answers to which are publicly available. Now, this is a great definition of consulting, or a definition. Consulting is giving expert advice. That ties in with Mac Hannon's idea. You got to bring something to the table. You've got to know something that the advertiser doesn't know. And there's a new book, well, 2011, the Challenger sale. And one of the things in the Challenger sale is you shouldn't be asking people what keeps them up at night. You should be telling them what should be keeping them up at night. You should be bringing them insights as to what they should be worrying about and future problems that they may encounter. Hold that thought. This guy is a CEO in India, Mumbai. He's with Cisco Systems, Cisco, the computer people. He has been a regional CEO of IBM, but Anil Menon is the guy, and by the way, every link in the handout and every picture beside on the margins has a link in it. There are 24 links in this handout, and you can link to I linked you to a video of his where he's talking about the things that he's thinking about, and really worth your time. So if you want to go down the rabbit hole, this is a 60-minute webinar, but there's another 8 or 9 hours of learning if you follow all the links to all the other resources I've linked you to. So there's a real treasure trove of things if you want to keep going. So he says the nature of the consultative sale is that you're creating the solution as you sell. So you really don't know what you're going to sell until you've done the discovery or the needs analysis. Interesting thought. This guy, Phil M. Jones, I've linked you to one of his talks in the link there. And he says selling is earning the right to make a recommendation. And I really love that notion that you've got to earn the right to make a recommendation instead of just go in with the package of the week and say, here's what I recommend. So my buddy Darren Steenbergen is a budding young, well, he's pretty good speaker now. I coached him a little bit, and I've trained him before. And Darren's out on the circuit when their circuit comes back, doing a lot of webinars. He's the guy that was one of the partners in the Rising Above Summit. But Darren's line is, unless you can say to the client, based on what you told me, here's what I'm going to recommend. Phil Jones would say, because you said this, and then he repeats what the client said, I'm going to recommend you do this. Because you said this, or based on what you told me, if you can start your presentation that way, you're much more likely to get a sale than if you just start pitching. All right, bottom of the page, people buy because we understand them, not because we make them understand our stations. So that's the next to the last line on page 1. And then in the course, I know some of you are in the course, Ignite Radio Sales. I teach a presentation system with the advertising balance sheet as the second page. And I lay out the pluses that I discovered in my needs analysis meeting or discovery meeting. And this is Al Rather's Rather Zimbrick Leasing. Leasing is trending up according to Automotive News. It's a higher percentage of leasing. You do lease all makes. A lease could cost people less because it lowers repair bills. You may pay a higher monthly fee, but you're not going to have a $2,000 engine repair because your car is always under warranty when you lease. Hey, and you got a great new sign, but 70% of consumers still buy cars, and a lot of people don't understand leasing. You got a great logo, but you don't have a strong positioning statement. You need to talk with prospects before they bought the car. So there's lots of noise in the marketplace. So the slogan we came up with, invest 10 minutes before you invest $30,000. Invest 10 minutes with Al Rather before you invest $30,000 or more on a new car. Let's talk leasing. So, but after I present this advertising balance sheet, I say, do I understand your business? And I was doing that in the early 80s and started teaching this because if I can get them to say, yeah, you really understand. If I understand their business more than the next rep, I'm going to get the sale and I'm going to build the relationship. And of course, we talk about the relationship. I developed a chart. This is the foundation of the accidental salesperson. Many of you have seen it. It's in your notes on page 2. But you want to be a true source of industry information and business intelligence. You want to be a resource. And you can have 10 or 15 level 3 moments where you're sending an article, or I found a fact that in the RAB instant background. Hey, I went online and checked something out, and I want to share this article with you. I think it'll help you. So anything you can do to be a true source of industry information, business intelligence, be a research. It doesn't have to be a pure level 3 relationship, but having 10 or 15 level 3 moments a week with 10 or 15 different prospects and advertisers will differentiate you. If you're just bringing in product literature, the media kits, you're going to be at level 1. And we really want you to be at level 2 most of the time. If you're at level 2, if that's your focus, and you can read this in depth, and most of you have seen this, but if you're at level 2, and even if you're a rookie, if you've never sold before, you don't have to start at level 1. You can start at level 2 and then have level 3 moments. And then over time, you can start to build relationships. The bottom of page 2, there's the reality check, or level 1, 2, and 3, and 4 sales relationships, sales conversations, sales presentations. And finally, you don't have a business relationship until someone writes you a check. And I think that might be one of the most important things. Oh, I got a great relationship. Well, have they written you a check yet? You may have taken them to lunch. You may know their kids' names. They may like you, but until someone writes you a check, you don't have a business relationship. So page 3, this is the tough stuff. This is the theoretical stuff that Lytle loves and most people sort of get nervous about. But this is Charles Brennan Jr., Charles D. Brennan Jr. And if you click on the link, Sales Questions to Close the Sale, or the book, you'll see a video of his. I think I linked you to an Amazon place to buy the book on Amazon, but a great video of his too. And Brennan is an interesting guy because he has studied with a professor about, how people remember conversations. And he talks about the recitation response, whereas Neil Rackham was talking about situation questions that bore people. A recitation response, according to Charles D. Brennan Jr., is one in which the prospect answers with something he or she already knows by rote. So they probably answer the question multiple times, and they just, you're asking them things, oh yeah, here's this, and they answer it by rote. Therefore, they don't really register the conversation with the salesperson as something that was significant. On the other hand, says Brennan, a dialogue-provoking question often requires the complex thinking on the part of the prospect. So the prospect has to think to give you the answer. Complex thinking, because this type of question often solicits an opinion rather than just a correct answer. It usually involves a longer exchange among individuals. And the thing is, they remember the meeting longer and they remember you longer because you ask a more complex question that required a dialogue-inducing answer instead of a rote answer. So, Charles Brennan is the one that taught me about MLPQs, multi-layered probing questions. And I'm going to teach this to you. Some of you may have encountered it in Ignite Radio Sales. Other people may have encountered it along the way when I was out on the road, but it's pretty simple. You make a statement of fact that you can source to some other credible source. And I'm going to do a demonstration of this in just a second. And then you make an observation, a personal observation that supports the fact, usually should support the fact that you just gave them. And then you ask a dialogue probing question, a dialogue provoking or probing question. So here's the statement of fact for this example. In preparing for this meeting, I found an insight from Hedges and Company that the median age of a BMW buyer is 56 years old. I'm calling on the BMW dealer. Yeah, I mean, here it is. The median age of the United States the population is 38 years, but the median age of a BMW buyer is 56. You know, Sarah and I leased our first BMW when I was in my early 50s, as I recall. I mean, and our 32-year-old niece is driving a Chevy Cruze. Nothing wrong with a Chevy Cruze, but older people tend to gravitate and have the money to buy more expensive cars because they have more disposable income, et cetera. So I'm wondering, talk about how you decide where to target your dealership's advertising, since you are a BMW dealer. So that's a factual statement, personal observation, and a probing question. So in this case, I used an embedded question. So the embedded question is, talk about how you decide where to target your dealership's advertising. It's an embedded question. It's embedded in the statement. Typically, those questions that seem to be more polite and less interrogational when you're talking, especially when you're doing a discovery, and you say, when did you start your business? How many people do you have? You start, it's like an interrogation. Why do you do this? Where is this? But if you talk about things like, tell me what makes you different from your two biggest competitors. I'd be interested in learning about the biggest mistake people make when they buy a diamond. You know, in order for me to make an intelligent presentation, I need to know your budget. So I'm not asking what's your budget. I'm giving him a reason and then ask, I need to know your budget, because in order to make an intelligent presentation. So those are embedded questions. Just for a second, all of you are members of, or your managers are members of instant sales training, because your radio partners of the Plansy Diet and Lytle and instant sales training. And this book, 23 Shockingly Simple Sales Ideas, was just named one of the best 100 sales books of all times by Book Authority. Now, Book Authority creates these lists, and they do have a click-through thing, and they do get a commission when you click through the top 100 books. But the other day, it was rated the 51st best sales book of all time. And all that is 23 scripts for my instant sales training knowledge bites. So you have access to instant sales training, or your manager does, and all of you can have it just by asking. But there are now 300, not 23, 300 knowledge bites on instant sales training, plus the extra credit videos page now has 66 YouTube videos that I've collected And I'm working on a new collection called the All-Stars of Training, Motivation, and Success. And I'm starting to collect all the Jim Rohn and Earl Nightingale things on YouTube. And that's going to be fun. I've got the first 6 or 7 of those done. All right. So bottom of page 3, local advertising mistake is advertising without saying exactly why you're doing it. And that's the important thing about this is that if you don't know what clients are expecting from their advertising, you can't manage those expectations. And if you don't ask why they're doing it, you can't write copy to help them get what they want, get the outcome they want. And so this is a vending machine, and I love vending machine. I haven't eaten out of a vending machine since Zola started the Plansy diet, but vending machines sell millions and millions and more dollars worth of crap, and they do it without pressure. They give you choices, they lay out the merchandise, they tell you what the price is, and you can pick whatever you want. So even though they sell a lot, there's no pressure. And so the Why Advertise Checklist is a little like a vending machine in that you give people choices. Why advertise? Why are you doing this? Even whether it's on my station or digitally or wherever you're advertising, what are you trying to accomplish? I'm looking at Lou Vito's. It's a nice likeness of you there, Lou. But Lou, you've had me in for seminars for advertisers, and I've been to Eureka and done seminars for advertisers. And I know you guys at Layton work with Chuck Mefford and his thing. But I used to go in. I've done about 450 seminars for advertisers where I talk about here's what to put in your commercial, here's how to advertise. And for the first 300 times I did it, I would put people at round tables in a hotel ballroom, and I would say, if this were heaven and not St. Cloud, Minnesota, you wouldn't have to advertise. I've done one in St. Cloud, Minnesota. You wouldn't have to advertise. If this were heaven and not, but there's competitors here. It's a dog-eat-dog world. There's a corporate battle going on. You got to advertise. But the big mistake is advertising without saying why you're doing it. So at your tables, and there was always one rep at the table taking notes, why advertise at all? And let's go around the table and tell each other why you advertise. Well, I got to build traffic. Well, I got to sell a little merchandise. And then the rep would get up and we'd read it, and then we'd put it up on a flip chart. And then we publish the things that they did in that seminar, and we'd take it back out to them the next 2 or 3 days and have a conversation about why they were advertising. And they would sell a ton of advertising because people were trained how to be better advertisers. So that was my deal way back a long time ago. So Lou, you remember that. And now we just say, here's the most often mentioned reason. This is over 44,000 people in a seminar setting have put this list together. And so then we ask people to, check the 7 things you like your advertising to do. And then let's drill down and find out the 3 things your advertising must do. And then when we get to the must things, we ask them 4 or 5 more questions about the must things. You want to build traffic? Oh, what kind of traffic? What kind of demographics are you looking for? What kind of income level should that traffic be? Do you have enough salespeople to handle the traffic if they come in? Do you have enough merchandise on hand? What's the biggest traffic day you ever had? So if they're interested in traffic, you want to be interested in traffic and ask more questions about what they're interested in and where their energy is. So this is the Why Advertising Checklist. I just printed out my handout and it looked a little blurry to me. If you want a different copy of this, I'll send you a couple different versions of it. But if it's a little small or whatever. So Why Advertise Checklist. But I would suggest to you that this is a discovery or needs analysis form that will give you as much data as asking a whole bunch of other questions about their business. If you can get them involved in this conversation, you can really find out what they want, where their energy is. So the quick question is, what is the most important reason to advertise on the Advertise checklist. So if anybody wants to text that into me or chat that to me, just hit the chat feature over on the More section, and you can send your reactions in. I got recruit employees. What's the most important reason to advertise on the Why Advertise checklist? Not getting a tremendous amount of participation yet. Generate new customers is one. Any and all, that's an answer. The most important reason on the checklist, branding, spoken like a latent rep, branding. I'm not saying that's wrong, hey, Norm. Gotta get you muted. So for those of you who came in a little late, I apologize. I'm going to have this on. I'm recording this, and then Andy gets the customer's reason. So it's whatever the customer checks is the most important reason. So the quick question was, what's the most important reason to advertise? It was a trick question because the most important reason to advertise is the reason the advertiser chooses, and it may change next quarter, it may change next week, but it's important to find out what the advertiser thinks is important and then move on from there. All right, so back to Charles Brennan, top of page 5 already, 9-page handout for a 60-minute webinar. But Brennan talks about questions about the past. And he says, if you ask the question, what are your goals? You're going from the present to the future. But if you take a look at the rest of this piece, you're leaving out the most important part of the pie. Almost everyone forgets to ask about the course of events that led to the present and shape the thinking process that determine future goals. Once we understand this, why the client is taking a particular approach and why it is traveling in a specific direction, the easier it is for us as salespeople to identify the prospect's pain, create a need to change, and present the solution. So whenever possible, attempt to frame a chronological comparison in terms of the prospect's history. So it's important to know something about the past. And then Neil Rackham talks of questions about the future. He says, research done in the last 3 or 4 years shows that customers rated the added value of salespeople as higher when salespeople ask about the future problems and not just about present problems. And if you go down that Neil Rackham quote, I'll just let you read for 30 seconds. And then what goes to the blank, salespeople ask about future problems, not just about present problems. And at the bottom, Neil Rackham says, I remember I interviewed one buyer in the research. He said to me, if I fall into a pit, there are 50 salespeople who can sell me a ladder to get me out of the pit. There's only 1 in 50 who can stop me from falling in the pit in the first place. That's a way of saying I'm interested in salespeople who can help me with the problems that have not yet occurred, not just the problems that have occurred. So that ties back to the challenger sale. You tell them what should be keeping them up at night. So those are some thoughts about questioning. If you just ask about the future and don't know about the past, you're not doing a full discovery meeting. And so this technique will help you do both of these things. And I know some of you have seen this, but I want to tell the story about it too. Best visual aid is a blank sheet of paper. I own a business and I've been a business owner for 36 years. So I buy stuff too. I'm a sales trainer. but I buy a lot of stuff. And so I was talking to a sales rep in my Madison office, and he said, you know, before I start to try to sell you a cheap telephone system, can I do a force field analysis on you? And I was with one of my associates, and I said, yeah, I'm not sure what a force field is, but if you want to. He said, well, this is what they teach us in our training program. This is $1 billion company back in the day. So he drew a line on a piece of paper, and he said, you started this business in 1984, right? I said, that was day one. And so here we are today. And he drew another line in the middle of the page, and he said, so here we are today. And man, he said, you got a great office. You look successful. He says, we're $1 billion company, and your Madison office is nicer than ours. I love the art. So he's doing a little bit of nice office, but he says, but tell me, what got you to this level of success since 1984? Because obviously you've had a good run. And all he did was draw 5 arrows, and I started yapping. And well, we always have a great handout. I do research. I don't teach anything that I wouldn't do. I don't teach techniques. I teach sales behaviors. And I just went on and on and on. And I get a lot of repeat business. And I've written an article in Radio Only magazine for 5 years in a row. And I'm becoming semi-famous in this industry. He said, okay, what's the next? And after, I talked for 15 minutes and told him all how great I was. And then he said, okay, what's the next level? Now, I said, it's the next million in sales. That's what I said. But I've had a CEO say, I got to get the stock back up to $42. I've had a retailer say, I need to open 2 more locations in this county, or I'm not going to be able to maximize my advertising budget against the marketplace. And everybody who owns a business or who is a CEO or a top level manager of business knows what the next level is. And then when I said, he said, well, what's keeping you from getting there? And he drew 5 arrows, the forces that are keeping me from getting to where I want to go. And I told him all my problems. I've got 2 people that are competing against me that I just trained last year, and they started a seminar business. It's kind of like the rep in town who starts an advertising agency. Maybe you've seen some of those. But the point, I said, and some people are out there cheaper than me, and then there's all the new flavor of the month. Somebody, well, I've already seen Lytle, and I had him last year, so he can't teach me anything else. And so I told him all my problems, and all of a sudden he knew more about my past and what I wanted in the future than he could have ever done by just asking me a few questions on a questionnaire. So I've just taught you this. By the way, I went to a National Speakers Association, $5,000 a seat, 3-day conference on facilitating and consultation. And they spent an afternoon teaching the force field analysis, which was developed by Kurt Einstein at the National Training Labs years ago. They spent 3 hours teaching this. I just spent 4 minutes teaching this. Anybody think you could go out and use this today without 3 more hours of training? I see some hands raising in the conference room. I see a head nodding in Massachusetts. Thank you. All right. So in our last 24 minutes, I want to talk about sorry about that. I'm going to reshare the screen. I was trying to do one other thing. Sorry. All right. Some of you are old enough to remember Earl Nightingale. I used to sell his syndicated program at WCLT Radio in Newark, Ohio. When I got into the radio business in 1972, he was syndicated on more than 8,000 radio stations around the world. He was the most syndicated person in the history of radio. I don't know if Rush ever got ahead of him or not, I doubt it. But he had a 5-minute show that you would sell to the bank. It said play at 7:30. And when I got to Madison, Wisconsin, my boss started playing Earl Nightingale records in our sales meetings about success, strangest secret. And then he played one, I don't know, I can't remember which album it was, but Earl Nightingale said in one of his records, this is before Nightingale Conant, and they started doing tapes and then CDs, but he was the founder of Nightingale Conant. He said, 1 hour per day of study will put you at the top of your field within 3 years. Within 5 years, you'll be a national authority. In 7 years, you can be one of the best people in the world at what you do. Now, I heard that when I was 24 years old. Now, I'll be 80 in 9 years and 14 days. So this was a young Chris Lytle, and I was a political science major. I was a business minor. I had a minor in speech, and I was selling radio advertising in Madison, Wisconsin. And I just said, well, I better start reading. And I studied a lot. I mean, I did more than an hour of study in college. And what I could do an hour a day. But the thing I did that was a little different was I read books on advertising. I read at least 3 books on advertising for every book I read on sales, because I figured if I knew more about advertising than a client, they would need me. And if I could get them results and I could bring them ideas that other people couldn't, they would want to see me. So I studied advertising. Now, that's Earl's quote. This is something for you to bring to the table, and I'm going to give you the master's course in advertising. I'm only going to give you 3 masters. If you take Ignite Radio Sales, I think I introduced you to 7 or 8. And if you want to know more, just let me know, and I'll be happy to share some other resources with you. But everybody has an opinion about advertising. This is on page 7. You need a philosophy of advertising. Oh, that was a funny ad. That was a great commercial. I really like that commercial. Doesn't matter if you like it or not. Did it work? Did it accomplish the objectives that the advertiser had for it? You need a philosophy of advertising so you can talk advertising instead of just talking rates and ratings. The quote from Dr. Jeffrey Lant years ago, all art students used to spend a portion of their time copying the old masters in museums. Through this process, they learned technique. By copying the old masters, they learned technique. What worked and what didn't, why more seasoned hands of theirs had done what they did. All great masters, whatever their fields, always know the basics, but they're great because they use these basics in new and exciting ways and ultimately go beyond them. So this is the Museo del Prado. You've got the Mona Lisa picture in yours, and if you click on the Mona Lisa link, you'll get a surprise. But this guy's at the Museo del Prado, and he's copying one of the masterpieces. When I went to the Museo del Prado, I had an hour and 15 minutes to see it because I was on a tour. I was with my brother and sister-in-law, and I said, well, since we only have a short time, let's just find somebody who's trying to copy a painting, and that'll be a masterpiece. And we'll just look at those paintings instead of trying to look at every painting in the museum. And when I got home, I saw a special on PBS one night about the Museo del Prado, and I'd seen every great piece of art in the museum just by going to where people are trying to copy these great masterpieces. So you got to copy the masters before you get your own technique. So the first master, and by the way, if you click on those links, one of those links is going to take you to an audio book, I think, and one of the links will take you to a 70-page PDF of scientific advertising and give you some background on it written in the 20s. But this is the book that all the internet marketing gurus say you should read. This guy invented A/B testing. He tested coupons against each other. And Claude Hopkins, the father of modern advertising, famously said, advertising is multiplied salesmanship. And so advertising truth number one, you're not selling commercials, airtime, spots, digital, you're selling sales calls on your audience. So this schedule gives you 30-second sales calls. I thought those are spots, says the client. No, advertising is multiplied salesmanship, and you're buying advertising. And right now you have 3 people in your showroom, and we're connecting with 1,000 or 2 or 3 more thousand people on our air, and we can sell to them while you're selling to the 3 people who are in your showroom. Advertising is multiplied salesmanship. So David Ogilvy, if you click on any of those, he's actually does an interview with David Letterman when David Letterman was in his 30s or so. And he's talking about Ogilvy on advertising. This is Confessions of an Advertising Man. David had his pipe, he could smoke in the office. But he said, avoid superlatives, generalizations, and platitudes. Be enthusiastic, friendly, and memorable. Don't be a bore. Tell the truth, but make the truth fascinating. David Ogilvy also said, you should not be allowed to write an ad unless you've read scientific advertising at least 3 times. Russell Reeves, his brother-in-law, gave David Ogilvy a copy of Scientific Advertising, and he swore by that book. Okay, so that's Ogilvy. This is Ogilvy's classic headline at 60 miles an hour. The loudest noise in this new Rolls Royce comes from the electric clock. And I love that. It's classic. You can Google it. But and if you start reading David Ogilvy's copy and study how he put it together, you become a better copywriter. So it's good to read other great copywriters if you're going to become a copywriter, or you have to come up with ideas for your clients. So there's that. Advertising truth number 2, truth is better than creativity. Truth is better than creativity. That's David Ogilvy. Tell the truth, but make the truth fascinating, David Ogilvy. And then there's Alvin Ickoff. And the thing about Alvin Ickoff is he was a great copywriter. There are his books, Direct Marketing Through Broadcast Media or Your Money Back. He's the father of the modern infomercial. But before that, he was the guy that wrote, some of you are old enough to remember this, Time Life books. And they had a Time Life series on the planets. And if you bought the first copy, maybe you get the first one for free, and then they come every month or every 2 months. And then there was the dinosaurs, and then there's geology, the Earth, and they just sent you books about this. And he wrote all the copy to sell all those Time Life books. And when he passed away, his obituary was in Time magazine. So he's a master. When you're a copywriter and you get your obituary in Time magazine, you've accomplished something. Anyway, his formula was state the problem, explain the solution, demonstrate how your product or service best provides a solution. So that's the Alvin Ickoff formula. Now, I had read those books by the time I was 26. And I'd read them sometimes more than once. And so all of a sudden, I got all this stuff in my head, political science major, but I'm starting to read. Earl Nightingale said, in 3 years, you'll be one of the very best at what you do. And then you'll be one of the best in the country in 5 years, and then one of the best in the world in 7 years. I think when I was 33, I did my first seminar in England. So all of a sudden, I'm an international consultant trainer, and all I did was read a bunch of books that other people hadn't. It's not fair. But this is the thing that happened to me is 1976. I was living in Madison, Wisconsin, and we had a ice storm. There was a 3-day ice storm where it started raining on Wednesday night and froze, and rained, and then it froze, and then it rained and froze. And on Friday, the governor declared Madison a disaster area and the county a disaster area. And National Guard troops were setting up shelters in elementary school gymnasiums because people were leaving their homes because 75% of the city had no lights, heat, or power. And the governor declared the city a disaster area. And on Saturday morning, Crazy TV Lenny, you saw his picture on page 1, his brother-in-law called and said, "Chris, get over here, we got to change the copy." And I said, "George, we've been declared a disaster area." He said, "The ice is melting. We're not going to close the store on Saturday. If it were Tuesday afternoon, maybe, but this is Saturday. This is retail. You told us when you sold us radio, we could change copy anytime we wanted." I said, "Did I tell you that?" He said, "Yes, get over here." And I went over to American TV and I went into the store. It was dark. There was no lights, heat, or power. George's wife, Jean, was putting votive candles next to the stereo systems. It was 10 till 9. The store opened at 9 o'clock. I had a yellow legal pad and I was over by the window. Right. And I said, "What's the copy?" He said, "We're open." Tell people we're open. And so I wrote this commercial on a legal pad in 7 minutes. And I've lived off of this commercial for the last 35 years. Because I was the guy in Madison that wrote this commercial. And all of a sudden, everybody wondered who I was.
All the regularly scheduled American TV commercials have been canceled to bring you this following special announcement. Now listen up. American TV is open, but there are no lights, no heat, no power. Now, if you're willing to shop under these conditions, American is willing to offer discounts lower than the sale prices that were advertised. If you're willing to buy a TV that you can't watch, a stereo you can't even listen to, or a washer and dryer you can't even see, then American is willing to deal. It's a sale not even Crazy TV Lenny planned. American's Ice Storm Sale. What you do is bring a flashlight, bring a candle, dress warmly, but shop now. This special pricing ends soon. It ends as soon as the lights, power, and heat go back on. So take advantage of it. American TV's Ice Storm Sale on the West Beltline.
So that ran on 3 radio stations until 4 o'clock when George called and said, "We got to get these commercials off the air." I said, "Didn't they work?" He said, "No, they worked." He said, "We got traffic backed up on the Beltline. We got 2 police officers in the parking lot parking cars and directing traffic." He said, "This is going to be the biggest day in the history of the store." And so if you like that story, if you click on the picture in your handout, it'll take you to my Hall of Fame, Wisconsin Broadcasters Hall of Fame induction video, where I tell this story, the commercial plays, and then the Crazy TV Lenny tells his version of the story, and then Tom Walker, the market manager of the radio station, tells his version of the story, and they mash it all together. But you could share that with a client, or you could just amuse yourself with it. But if you like the story and you want to have a copy of the Ice Storm Sale, you've got one there. All right. As we finish this off, it's important that you talk about triggering events. And people say, "Well, nobody mentioned my ad. Why are results so hard to trace?" And the answer is because people respond to needs, not to ads. And it's very important that you understand that. It's very important that you say that to people. People respond to needs, not to ads. Nobody says, "I'm here because your advertising has influenced me over the years and I was powerless to resist." There I am, and my client was Octopus Car Wash. And how did I make it with that outfit? I had hair, I had hope, positive mental attitude. I wore a leisure suit to work in those days. I had an orange Gremlin and I still made it, but there's more to that story. But I went to Octopus Car Wash one day and the guy said, "We just did a survey and we asked people why they came to the car wash and nobody mentioned your radio stations." And they were running a ton of commercials. He said, "So we're going to lay low for a while and see if we can do this without advertising. I know this has never happened to you and never will because people are more enlightened these days." But I said, "Well, what did you ask, Jeff?" He said, well, I asked the first 100 people who came into our Park Street location, why'd you come to the car wash today? And he said, it's amazing. 96% of the people said, well, my car was dirty. Nobody said because of the radio station. And I said, you asked the wrong question. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, that's the wrong question. He said, what's the right question? I said, why'd you come to Octopus when your car was dirty instead of the other 27 places you could have gone, including your driveway? Why'd you come to Octopus when your car was dirty? That's the question. People respond to needs, not to ads. But there was something in the ad that made them come to you instead of do it themselves or go to your competitor. So, I said, I never thought of that. So I said, look, I go home at night and read automotive news to try to help you. And you can cancel, and then I'm going to have to use all my creativity to resell you, or I can use my creativity to do good commercials for you and sell more car washes for you. What do you want me to do? Do you want to cancel and make me use my time to resell you, or do you want to stay with me and I'll keep working when you're not looking to come up with better commercials? He said, oh, I'm not going to cancel. So I pulled that one out. Triggering events, something happens, something always happens. You discover a need, you evaluate options, you resolve doubts, and then you buy. That's what, you do that when you go to lunch. I'm hungry. Me too. Where do you want to go? I don't know. Where do you want to go? Oh, let's go to Pizza Hut. I can't go to Pizza Hut. I'm low carb right now. Well, they have a salad bar, but I got to be back at 1 for a meeting. It's a buffet. You'll be back. And then you buy. It may take you 2 minutes to decide where to go to lunch, but it may take you 2 weeks or 3 weeks once you decide to buy a car. And you can work on buying a house for 6 months to a year, but you're still going through these things. So what's already happened in your prospect's life that may have created a need for what you're selling? And that's a great question to ask. What's happened already in their lives that makes them need what you're selling? So Ed Shane wrote a textbook called Selling Electronic Media. And in it, he writes, immunity to advertising is one of humankind's most comforting self-delusions. I love that quote. Well, advertising doesn't affect me. I make up my own mind. I'm immune to advertising. And so what I do is I watch how advertising works on me. I believe in advertising because I know because I really observe what happens. So I'm going to tell you this last story, and then we'll be finished. And here's what happened. One of the last times my parents drove to Madison, Wisconsin, from Newark, Ohio, where I was born, to where I lived for 30 years, Madison, Wisconsin. They got out of the car and I hugged my mom, and my dad wasn't driving in those days. I hugged my dad, and I hugged him so hard that his glasses fell off of the top of his head and landed on my driveway and shattered his trifocal lenses, both of them. And he goes, what'd you do that for? I said, I love you, man. I said, I'm sorry. He said, you ruined my glasses. He's mad at me. And he just came in the driveway. And he said, no, I can't read. I can't watch TV. I'll have trouble eating. I said, Dad, I'm sorry. Do you have another pair? Yeah, 550 miles away. So I'm going to go back here for just a second. Broken glasses, discover a need, which he didn't have a second ago until I hugged him. What are we going to do? I said, well, if you have a pair at home, Mark, my brother, can drive over because he lives 30 miles away, and he can FedEx them, and they'll be here tomorrow. And he absolutely positively has to be there overnight, FedEx. But if you need new glasses in about an hour, we could go to the mall and go to Lens Crafters. And my dad was 75 years old at the time. And this is what worries me about getting old. He said, I've heard about Lens Crafters. We don't have one in Newark. but I heard about them. That sounds like fun. Let's go. So we went to LensCrafters, and he had a pair of trifocals made in about an hour and a half, 2 hours, because it was complicated. And he has these new glasses on. He goes over to buy, I had to pay for them. And I said, Dad, let me buy. He said, I'll buy. I said, I'm making money, I'll buy. He said, oh, I'll buy. I said, okay. And they said, Mr. Lytle, how'd you hear about LensCrafters? He said, word of mouth. When my son broke my glasses, he recommended I come over here. And I would just suggest that they wouldn't have gotten any word of mouth without the promise they made in their advertising. And when I discovered a need that I needed to come up with some glasses, that's the first thing, or the second thing, FedEx, LensCrafters, and I went and bought, or my dad bought. So people respond to needs, not to ads. So he thinks it's word of mouth, but it's really advertising working when the triggering event occurred. All right, that's the broken glasses story. Education without action is entertainment. To know and not to do is not to know. A learning event like this is without taking action is as useless as a parachute that opens on the first bounce. So on your last page, I've got a letter to my boss or a letter to my coach. And Amy just arrived, but she might not have known this was started on Eastern Daylight Time. So the letter to my coach is having just attended the advertising, advanced consulting tools for advertising sales professionals. Here's what I think I learned, and you can put down 2 or 3 things you learned or relearned. And then here's what I plan to do or change or improve as a result. You can put 2 or 3 things down that you want to improve, and then share that with your coach and ask for some help in really putting this into action. So education without action is entertainment. To know and not to do is not to know. A learning program that doesn't change your behavior in some small ways is useless as a parachute that opens on the first bounce. So thanks for being part of this. Thanks for all you do for Plan Z. And if you need anything from me in terms of content or ideas or consulting, or you just want to chat about a problem child or a problem client, I'm here. I'm not spending a lot of time on the road, and I'd love to talk, love to chat, love to help you. Thanks, everyone. Talk soon.